Hey there, welcome to episode 256 of Mike's Collection. I'm Mike, and the part of my collection that I'm going to be talking about today is Wave 11 of Mattel's Masters of the Universe Origins figures. Now, I have done a video for every prior wave, so waves 1 through 10, plus I've done videos where I reviewed some of the vehicles, some of the deluxe figures, the Castle Grayskull, as well as some of the tie-in Masters of the WWE Universe that they've released. So in total, I've probably done 13 or 14 videos devoted to Masters of the Universe Origins. It's a fun line. It's been a while since I've posted a video, and it's not because I haven't gotten any figures. It's just that for whatever reason, I keep reviewing other new stuff that is coming in, and my Masters of the Universe Origins figures keep getting kind of tucked aside. So the figures that I'm reviewing for you today, and as I sit here to film this, it is June 2023. I got these figures in November 2022. So they've been sitting around for a while. And the main reason they got delayed is that, for the most part, I am a completist when it comes to this line. I've been buying pretty much everything that comes out at retail. There are a couple holes in my collection from like convention exclusives that I wasn't able to get. But I probably have 90% of the figures or more. However, in the last couple of waves, they've been starting to make figures that I didn't really think I wanted, figures that I didn't really care about, and I started wondering, like, is this getting out of hand? Do I really need to buy all of these versions of these characters that I don't care about? And largely, they were the figures that were related to the Sunman subset, which if you don't know what that is, I'll talk about it a little bit later, because I've got a Sunman figure to talk about. But for this particular wave, each wave has been about 4 figures. So when this wave went up for pre-order sometime last year, I decided to skip one of the characters, which was Boltman. He is part of the Sunman subset. So I skipped him, and I thought, I'm not going to bother buying that guy. I'm going to buy the other 3, and when they show up, I'll review them. So I pre-ordered the 3. They did show up in November. And then I thought, you know what? I kind of want to get Boltman after all. So I placed my order for Boltman. He was already sold out, so I had to pre-order while the Big Bad Toy Store, where I order my toys online, I had to wait for them to get another one in stock. And some time passed, and then they finally sent him, and I got him quite a while ago as well. But I think it's because there was that little lag in time that made me fall behind. And I did the next thing for the next wave as well. There was another 4 characters in wave 12. I ordered 3 of them, figuring that I didn't need the Sunman character, which was Hypno in wave 12. But then when I got Boltman, and I actually quite enjoyed him, I thought, man, now I better go order Hypno. And so then when wave 12 came, I got the 3 figures and had to wait a while for the 4th figure to show up. So this seems to be a little bit of a cycle I've fallen into. Because believe it or not, I've done it again with wave 13. There was a Snake version of Teela that I was going to pass on. So I ordered the other figures, and I have them here. But now I've decided I'm going to get the Snake Teela so I can review the whole wave for you guys. So when Snake Teela shows up, hopefully I can finally catch up, and I'll review waves 12 and 13. Plus I've got a bunch of the deluxe figures sitting around. So yeah, lots to talk about. Anyway, so there's 4 figures from wave 11. I've got all 4 of them here. We're just going to do a quick review of each one, compare them to maybe past versions of those characters. And yeah, and then that's it for today. It'll probably be a relatively short video with only 4 figures to talk about. And yeah, why don't we just get on with it. So let's start off with talking about our hero, He-Man. Now, before I actually talk about the figure, I'm going to mention a couple of things that I usually forget to mention when I do these Masters of the Universe Origins videos. Every figure comes packaged with a little piece of paper here that tells you which parts are interchangeable. So you can see here you can't like split their torsos in half and match a different front with a back and things like that. But they are meant to separate at the head, the arms, the boot cut, and at like the crotch. So you can do some mix and matching and make some Frankenstein-like characters. I really don't have much use for that functionality, but if you feel like customizing some weird figures, you can certainly do that. Kill me! Another thing I want to mention is that every one of these Origins figures comes packaged with a little comic book, just like the vintage figures used to do. And these are pretty cool. You can see for this particular issue, it's got Boltman on the cover. He's the new character that's being introduced. So all 4 figures in this wave came with the exact same comic, and it features the 4 characters in the wave. So Boltman's on the front. You see Cobra Khan and Rattlor, who we're going to talk about, are on the cover. And sure enough, there's He-Man with his snake armor, when we get inside the book. But one thing that's interesting is I've gotten quite a few of these comic books, and they look just like this. You'll notice there's no text. So you kind of just have to fill in the blanks yourself. And I always figured when I would get these blank comic books that Mattel was just being too cheap to bother to come up with an actual storyline. But with this particular wave of figures, I actually got some comic books with no text, but then I also got a comic book, same thing, except with the text. So the difference being, and I never noticed this before, that on Big Bad Toy Store, some of the figures are labeled international release. It's just like a little thing in brackets. And I never really paid any attention to which ones I was ordering because it didn't matter to me. Basically, if you get the international release, it has bilingual packaging on the back, so it would have English and French and stuff for all the legalese. I don't know. Yeah, like here you can see there's multiple languages on the back. This one here, which is the English comic book, it just has just a little teeny bit of text. So when they go with the international comic book, they don't give you any text because I guess they don't want to put it in 10 different languages. There just wouldn't be room for all that text. So they just give it to you blank. But if you buy the American release, you get the full text of the comic book. So that's rather interesting. Anyway, just thought I would note that. But now let's move on to the figure. So here is Snake Armour He-Man. I'll put in a little split screen here so you can see him both inside and outside of the packaging. I'm not really going to talk about the packaging for each of these figures. I'll show it to you, but basically the packaging's all pretty the same. It's cool. It's got that kind of exploding red rock background, just like the vintage toys. And then it's got like a little kind of original artwork along the top of the packaging, which is pretty cool, that focuses on the character. And sometimes there's some nice little Easter eggs in that artwork for upcoming figures. Anyway, so this is Snake Armour He-Man. He's pretty cool. I like this figure quite a bit. I didn't always... I always liked He-Man, but he was not my favorite character in the toy line. I still have my vintage He-Man from when I was a kid. So this is my original 1983 or 84, whatever it was. My original He-Man. He's a little busted up in that he doesn't have his armor anymore. That's been lost. His hand, it's been all chewed up by my little brother when he was a baby. But he's still in not too bad a shape. Anyway, so this is the original 80s He-Man. So size-wise, you can see how the Origins figures match up. They look pretty good. They just have increased articulation. So where the original figures, their arms could only move forward and backwards. They had no knees. There was no swivel at their boots. No elbows. And they turned like that, and their heads could only turn side to side. So I won't talk about it with every single figure, but just to show you the increased articulation, the heads can now look up and down. They've got elbows. They've got wrists that they didn't have before that can turn and go up forward and backwards like this. They've got knees, so they can bend their knees now. They've got ankle articulation as well, so their feet can go back. They're just a lot more posable than the vintage figures. Now, we did get a He-Man that was based on the original He-Man pretty early in the line. Back in Wave 1, we got this guy here. I'm trying to fit everybody on screen here. So this was the Wave 1 He-Man. So he was modeled after this one. So you can see how the colors all match up. He had the same weapons. This guy's missing his, of course, but he had that gray and red armor. He had the shield, the sword, the axe. Now, you might notice that the face sculpts are fairly different. This guy, they tried to do kind of a more modern, contemporary take, which I actually kind of liked, which is why I have it displayed on him, because there are alternate heads available. You see here, I have another He-Man from the Origins line with a more classic style head. So, yeah, if you like the classic 80s He-Man, you don't like any of this more modern stuff, don't worry. There's plenty of options like this in the Origins line if you prefer. But we're not talking about those guys today. Today we're talking about the He-Man from 2002. So let's get rid of all these guys. So in 2002, there was a brand new He-Man cartoon and a brand new toy line. So this is my He-Man from the 2002 line. So he has increased articulation from the vintage line, but he's still pretty limited in that he has no knee joints, he has no elbow joints. I think he swivels at the, so he swivels at the wrist, and, his head probably moves a little bit better. But, he's still pretty limited, but he's definitely got increased sculpting. He had more accessories. They're larger. I really loved these figures from 2002. I thought these were great. And I was pretty disappointed when the show was canceled prematurely. We never really got to finish the storylines that they had started. And the toy line ended before we got so many of the cool characters with their cool new redesigns. Anyway, in the third season of the 2002 cartoon, He-Man had kind of moved on from fighting Skeletor, and he was fighting the Snake Men. So with the introduction of the Snake Men, he was given some new Snake Armour. Now, I don't actually have the Snake Armour He-Man that came out back in the early 2000s. At the time, these figures were very hard for me to find here in Canada. And also, they put out a whole lot of variants of the same characters. There was like a Samurai He-Man, there was like a Arctic He-Man, there was Snake Armour He-Man, and a dozen more. And it just kind of felt like a pointless cash grab, so I never did buy the Snake Armour He-Man back in the day. Anyway, before we get rid of this He-Man, I just want to mention we actually got a nice version of him, the 2002 He-Man, in his standard outfit in an earlier wave of Origins. So that's Mattel doing the new version of this guy, which is kind of cool. And these two should look pretty similar because they're both based on the 2002 toy line. So they share a head sculpt, and they probably share some other pieces. They both have the updated power sword. So you can see the original He-Man had that very simple sword based on the 80s sword, whereas this guy, he's got a much more complicated design. And both of these figures have that. So while I don't have the 2002 Snake Armour to compare to, what I do have is in the Masters of the Universe Classics line, which ran from about 2009 to 2019 or so, they put out a version of Snake Armour He-Man. And I love this figure. It's got the cool design from the 2002 look. He's got what I would say is kind of the cooler hair and everything, and I like the armor and all that stuff. But he's also got the better articulation. So the 2002 figure wouldn't have had elbows or knees, but this guy had all that. He's got ankles. So really cool design. He's bigger and buffer. He's not quite as stylized as the 2002 figures. It was like the best of both worlds, and I absolutely love this figure. So when they announced that they were going to do the Snake Armour He-Man in the Origins line, I was pretty excited because I like the Origins line. It's not as good as the Classics line, but the Classics line has ended. The Origins is what we're getting these days. I like it. I'm buying all the figures. So seeing as this is one of my favorite looks for He-Man, I was glad to get this updated version. And since we're comparing kind of apples to apples here, you can see what a good job they've done of recreating it. Now they have cheaped out a little bit on, say, some of the paint apps, like his belt. It's got that sculpted kind of snake design, but it's all just silver. Whereas this guy, he's got a much more elaborate, you can see the snake and the sword. It's red and gold. So, same as on the boots there. He's got a couple different shades of gray, where this guy is just solid silver. So the Origins figures in general, they're a little simpler than the Classics figure, so I'm not really going to fault it for not having the same amount of paint apps and everything. For what it is, I think it's pretty cool. So I don't know if I have a whole lot more to say about this guy. I love this figure. I think he's great. I really like this design. But, if you don't like the 2002 look for He-Man, then you probably don't need this figure. Or maybe you have the previous, version of He-Man here, and that's good enough. The Snake Armour might not be for everybody because it's, it doesn't look particularly functional. I don't know how this helps protect him from snakes in any way. He's still, pretty exposed here to snake bites and things like that. He only has this new weapon, which is some sort of claw, and it doesn't really have a functionality. I think the 2002 version did have, you could press a button and this claw would grip, but this one here, it doesn't. It just kind of plugs into a hole on his glove and then just sits there and doesn't actually do anything. But anyway, I love this figure anyway. I think it's really cool. So I'm glad that we got it in the Origins line. So next up, we'll talk about the villainous character, Cobra Khan. And this guy's pretty cool. I'm happy to have gotten this guy because this is a figure I don't have nearly as many figures to compare to. I'm missing some key versions of Cobra Khan. So he was kind of interesting because he was, he's clearly a snake man, and he was introduced in the toy line before the concept of the snake men really happened. So he was just, some random snake guy. The same way Merman is just kind of a random fish guy. Beast Man is kind of a random ape guy. But then, in like the third or fourth year of the original Masters of the Universe toy line, Mattel decided to introduce a whole new faction called the Snake Men. So then Cobra Khan was kind of lumped in with them after the fact. But originally, he was just intended to be one of Skeletor's random evil warriors. And I never had that vintage toy when I was a kid. Neither did my brother. I talk all the time about me and my brother. We shared a bedroom. We kind of shared our collections. He collected half the figures. I collected the other half. So between the two of us, we had some pretty good-sized collections of all those 80s toy lines, like G.I. Joe, Transformers, He-Man, whatever. But neither of us had a Cobra Khan. But the vintage toy was kind of cool in that he looked just like this, because as you've seen, the Origins figures do a very good job of recreating the looks of the vintage figure, but they've just got the added articulation of the elbows and knees and so forth. Anyway, the vintage figure had a cool play feature where you filled his torso with water, and then you pressed his head down, and he sprayed mist out of his mouth like a spray bottle, and that was supposed to be venom that Cobra Khan was spitting. Now, unfortunately, with a lot of the later versions of Cobra Khan, he doesn't have that same play feature, but they've tried to recreate it here and there. So the first Cobra Khan I ever got was this guy here, and he's from the 2002 series. So as you can see, he's much more stylized. He's a lot more angular. He's kind of based off of a Japanimation type of look. And right off the bat, you might notice, sure, he's a little different with the colors, and he's a little sleeker and all that stuff. But one of the main features that they've added is the hood, like he's a cobra, which makes sense since he's Cobra Khan. It's kind of weird that the vintage figure never had a hood like that. But this guy does, and it's part of the sculpt. You can't remove it, at least not easily. So yeah, he just always has that hood like that, which in the vintage cartoon, I believe that he had the hood sometimes. So usually when he sprayed or something, the hood would come out. So it was kind of like the Dilophosaurus from the original Jurassic Park. No hood, and then when he sprayed, the hood popped out. Anyway, this figure here, he's pretty cool. You'll notice when I was showing you up close, his head kind of popped off. That's because he retains that spray functionality. So you can actually fill him with water, and his mouth, if you see there's a little hole in his mouth, so when you press down on his head, he would actually spray water, which was really cool. Anyway, this is a cool figure. And even though Cobra Khan was never really a favorite character of mine because I didn't have the vintage toy, and, even in the show, he wasn't a character that really, I found all that compelling, I kind of have a soft spot for this figure because I've been collecting figures pretty much since I was a kid. When I was a kid, I didn't really consider it collecting so much as I wanted toys to play with. But as I, got into my early 20s and I continued to buy toys, that's kind of when I transitioned to toy collector. And my collection continued to grow and grow. And in 2012, that was the year that I started my first toy blog. So that was the first time I started sharing my collection with, you guys, the general public. I went from blogging to then doing my Instagram to doing YouTube and all that stuff. So I don't really blog anymore. But the very first toy in my collection that I decided to write about when I started my blog, which is mikescollection.wordpress.com, was Cobra Khan. And not for any particular reason. I just looked around my room at the time. I had these figures displayed on a shelf beside my desk. So I grabbed him and I wrote about him. So ever since then, I've kind of had a soft spot for Cobra Khan. Now, when the Classics line came out in the 2010s, there was a Cobra Khan figure, but he sold out so quickly. Those Classics figures you could only buy online on Mattel's website. They went up for sale on the 15th of every month, and you had to snap them up quick because otherwise they disappeared. So Cobra Khan, I wasn't able to get him, which was a huge bummer because I really wanted all the main characters in the Classics line, and I got pretty close. But Cobra Khan is one of those key characters that I'm missing. And then even when they did a variant version of Cobra Khan in the Classics line called Camo Khan, I failed to get him too. So I don't have any Cobra Khans in my classic collection. Literally the only other Cobra Khan I have in my entire toy collection is this Funko Pop of Cobra Khan. So that's my whole Cobra Khan crew right there. So I don't really have the vintage figure or the classics version to compare this guy to. So we'll just take a closer look at this guy. So he's pretty cool. He does not have the spray functionality. You can't press on his head or anything like that. So instead, he came with this translucent green spray, so you don't have to put that in there. You can just plug that into the hole in his mouth. So otherwise, you can display him like that if you prefer. But if you want to kind of replicate that spraying, that's how that works. And then for accessories, he came with this little orange gun, which is the same gun that he's always come with, dating back to the vintage toy line. Even the Funko Pop has that little orange gun. So, that makes sense that that's what they gave him here. And yeah, there's really not a whole lot more to say about him. You'll notice he doesn't have the hood on this figure, so that that goes back to the vintage toy design. However, I mentioned in my intro that I have some of the deluxe figures that Mattel's been putting out as part of this Origins line. And one of the figures that they put out as a mail away on their website was Camo Khan. And that version of Cobra Khan, which is basically this same figure but just repainted, he actually does have a hood option. He has two heads, so the with hood or without. Anyway, I'm not going to bother hauling that figure out or talking about him now, because I'll review him when I do a video of the 4 or 5 deluxe figures that I've accumulated over the past half a year. But anyway, we will talk about him later. But for now, I will just say that this figure is pretty cool, and I am glad to have him in my collection. So next up, we'll take a look at the heroic character, Boltman. So this is the figure that I said in my introduction that I originally passed on. And there's nothing wrong with this figure per se. And I really don't want to go into the background on the Sunman figures too much, because I have talked about it in a couple of previous videos. But basically, in the 80s, there was a parent who felt that the existing toy lines, like Masters of the Universe, there wasn't enough diversity in the characters. So she created her own toy line, kind of mimicking or ripping off the Masters of the Universe style of figure, the big muscle man. And she created her own toy line called Sunman, where the main character, Sunman, was African American, and then all of his friends were all different minorities as well. So with Boltman here, I'm not entirely sure. He kind of looks like he might be like Mexican or something, although he also kind of looks like he might be like indigenous, North American Indian. So I don't know. But anyway, so I feel a little bad when I said that I didn't really want to buy this figure, and when the next wave came around, I almost passed on Hypno, who is another African American character from the Sunman line. But I can assure you it has nothing to do with their race or anything of why I wasn't interested in these figures. It's just that I didn't know the Sunman line ever existed. I don't know if it ever made its way to Canada back in the 80s when it first came out, but I've never heard of these Sunman characters until like 2 years ago, when Mattel said they were going to integrate those characters into their toy line. So I've just learned about these figures. I have no nostalgic connection to any of them, and I just find them to be kind of boring. As I said earlier, like, He-Man was never my favorite character as a kid because he's just some plain blonde dude. I preferred the guys that were lizards and robots and fishmen and all that sort of stuff. So with this line where it's mostly just guys in armor, I thought they were kind of boring. But I did have a change of heart after my other 3 figures arrived, and I thought, you know what, I might as well order this guy. He's $20, what's the big deal? And then I got him, and I actually really like him. Like, I stand by my initial assessment that he's just a human character in armor. There's nothing super exciting about him. Some of these guys' power sets are a little vague. You know, like, a lot of the Masters of the Universe characters have a gimmick. You know, like Cobra Khan sprays his venom. Rattlor, who we're going to look at next, his neck extends. You know, Mecha Neck, his neck also extends. Ram Man rams. Boltman, I guess he has bolts. And it's just, you know, it's not a feature that lends itself to, you know, like a play feature or something, as well as the ramming and the extending and all that sort of stuff. But he is unique amongst my Masters of the Universe collection. He looks, you know, pretty different. He doesn't look like anybody else on the shelf. not just because of his ethnicity, but also just because of his colors. This like bright baby blue and the dark skin and everything. Like, it looks good. I like it. Now for accessories, the only thing he comes with is these 2 bolts, which they can be stored in his backpack, kind of like a quiver. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, take them out like so. Now I guess he can hold them like swords. I don't know if there's any other way you would want to. Maybe you can hold it like a gun or something. I don't know. I think swords is the way to go. So yeah, I don't know if that's the intent, that he uses these like a couple of swords, or if he throws them like Zeus. But anyway, that's Boltman. I don't have any figures to compare him to because I do not have the vintage Boltman from back in the day. And yeah, this is the first time that he's ever been integrated into the Master of the Universe line. So yeah, he's got the same articulation, all that sort of stuff. So if you are willing to add some new characters that you don't necessarily have nostalgic attachment to, I think Boltman makes a nice addition. So yeah, I would say pick him up. So the last figure that we're going to look at in this wave is Rattlor. So this guy was introduced kind of late into the vintage toy line. The Snake Men were kind of the last gasp before Masters of the Universe kind of petered out. I did not have the vintage Rattlor. The only Snake Man I had as a kid was King Hiss. But this guy's cool. And the vintage toy, like all Masters of the Universe vintage toys, they had like a play feature. So with him, just like the character Mechaneck, you could extend his neck. So the vintage toy looked a lot like this one as far as the design goes, you know, the paintwork, the detail, all that sort of stuff. Now again, it had less articulation, so he wouldn't have had the elbow and the knee joints and the boot cut and the ankle articulation, all that stuff we've already talked about. But the vintage figure, I would say, had an advantage in that he had a little lever on his back that when you moved the lever, the neck would go in and out. So the neck would tuck into his body, and you could either have no extended neck or a full extended neck. And so that was kind of a fun little play feature that we have lost. Now you actually have to snap the neck in place. So you pop it off, and if you don't want him to have an extended neck, you pop his head off of there, so then you just have this piece, which I think it's kind of lame that it's not painted. I think that's true to the vintage toy, but you know, they have made other improvements on these figures, so I don't know why they wouldn't have painted the back of that red and left the, you know, the front of it yellow, because that would match up with like his chest better, I think. But anyway, so yeah, if you don't want him to have an extended neck, he looks like this. Whoops. Now, I do have an issue with this figure. So he's got, for an accessory, he's got the same snake staff that all the Snake Men come with. They usually come in unique colors that kind of match the characters. Now, this guy has a rubber tail, very similar to Whiplash, who came out in one of the prior waves. But I don't find Whiplash is as bad as this guy's. You see it kind of hangs down past the length of his legs. And it rests there like that, and I find it constantly kind of knocks him over. It probably won't do it now that I'm telling you about it. But whenever I stand this guy up before, this rubber, it seems to kind of settle, and then it slowly does this, and then he topples over. So it's not the greatest design. You would actually think that that might help him stand up, because he can kind of lean into it like that. But I find the opposite. I find it actually forces him to fall over pretty regularly, which is kind of annoying. But otherwise, he looks good. I like this character. I like this figure. Now, I didn't have the vintage one. In the 2002 line, I did not get Rattlor there either. I really liked the redesign for 2002 because they kind of made him the muscular brute of the Snake Men. He was bigger. I think he was supposed to be more of a general, and they'd given him some additional armor, which just helped him stand out a little bit. It gave him some more unique little attributes. Anyway, when they did make Rattlor in the Classics line, which I've got him here, and he doesn't fit on screen because I have his extended neck plugged in. But just like this figure, the neck is optional. So you can remove this piece and just put his head right down on his shoulders. But you can see on this one here, they did paint the back of the neck red and just left the front yellow, which is what I would have liked to have seen them done with this guy. The classic figure is really cool, and he does have this armor, which is based on the 2002 armor, so that's optional. If you want your classics version to look more classic, you could take off that armor. But if you want him to kind of replicate the 2002 look and give him just a, another kind of unique piece that makes him stand out from the other Snake Men, I prefer the armor, so I always display mine like that. I like the tail on this guy better. It's solid sculpted plastic, and it does serve as a solid anchor that he can kind of lean on, as opposed to this kind of weird soft rubbery bit that the Origins version has. So I don't have too much more to say about this guy. He's cool. I feel at this point, we're 11 waves in now, either you like Masters of the Universe Origins or you don't. Like, I get that they're kind of simple, especially compared to the Classics line that we got for so long. And even now, they're kind of competing with themselves against the Masters of the Universe Masterverse figures that are also out. Those are 7 inches, they're highly articulated, they're more detailed. So yeah, I could definitely understand why some collectors might veer towards those figures instead of these kind of simplified ones. For me, I'm just a sucker for this nostalgic look, and because I was missing so many figures from the original vintage line, I'm really happy to get these new and improved versions. And initially, in my first bunch of videos of these, I really kind of hyped these figures up as being a great bang for your buck because they were really affordable. They have gotten less so over the course of 11 waves. They're pretty comparable to a lot of other toy lines now, but initially these figures, even here in Canada, they were like $14.99 to buy, which was great compared to so many other figures that were like $30. But now I find these figures have creeped up, and especially now that Mattel is selling these figures, a lot more of them are online exclusives. Now I have to factor all that shipping and everything into it. So it is becoming a little more difficult to collect the line, but I still am getting a big kick out of these figures, and I like to see that they are expanding beyond just the vintage toy line. Like, they're taking chances with characters like Boltman, and there's a lot of new characters coming up in the upcoming waves. So yeah, stay tuned for those in future videos. So that was my review of Masters of the Universe Origins Wave 11. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and leave me comments below. It's very much appreciated. And yeah, if you did enjoy this video, make sure to come back soon, because I'll be posting another video with Wave 12 sometime soon. And there's new content coming all the time. My next video probably won't be Wave 12, but it'll be something else interesting. So come back for that. Anyway, I will see you then. Thank you very much for watching. Ciao.